welcome back to BlockTV. This is HODL with HEDL, and on a special day when Facebook has launched its much-awaited Libra blockchain project, and we'll have to see how it's guiding through this journey as a whole. We're joined by Bitcoin early adopter and influencer Dan Held, co-founder of asset management firm Interchange. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, and excited for our second episode.
Yes, certainly so. And so on this second episode, on an auspicious day when Facebook finally releases the details of their Libra currency, firstly, Dan, what's your hot take? What's your first thoughts?
Well, I think Libra is a great step forward in terms of pushing forward the adoption and visibility of cryptocurrencies. When I got into cryptocurrency in 2012, specifically Bitcoin, it was the only cryptocurrency at the time, and it was considered very unsavory. So for one of the largest tech companies in the world to create their own, I think is good for visibility of cryptocurrencies and visibility of Bitcoin. Facebook and other large institutions acknowledging and accepting that cryptocurrencies will be a thing is really, really beneficial. But I don't consider it a threat to Bitcoin.
I want to break down into that a bit because there have been a lot of different reactions today, sort of partisan divide that I've seen forming between those who see it as this Libra coin as an existential threat to the crypto sphere as a whole, whether that be through crackdowns and regulation or taking of market share, and others who see this as an onboarding opportunity to bring new sort of players and new people into the industry. Break down a little bit for me how you sort of pan out in this Facebook and wider industry adoption of the Libra currency and entering into the crypto sphere.
Yeah, well, I can break down a little bit further why I don't really consider it a threat to Bitcoin. It's kind of like saying Visa is a threat to gold. They're not really competitive. Libra is not trying to be a new gold 2.0. It's not trying to be a store of value necessarily. It's more looking to be a medium of exchange. At least that's what I interpreted the press release this morning and other information that I've received. And so I don't really see it as a threat to Bitcoin long term. It doesn't have a lot of the same principles and parameters that Bitcoin has, like a 21 million hard cap, which means that there will only be 21 million Bitcoins ever created. This is largely a corporate coin that is meant to facilitate cheaper and faster payments. And I think that's completely different than what Bitcoin is as a gold 2.0. Digging a little bit further into this being around Facebook's strategy, Facebook right now is undergoing a huge amount of scrutiny. So Facebook has a host of privacy issues that have surfaced over the last year and a half. As we saw yesterday, Facebook's stock price jumped up quite a bit with the announcement of their new cryptocurrency. So this definitely provides a well-needed distraction from Facebook's core PR problems. Additionally, Facebook is going through a very unique time right now. As the older Facebook product, as users start to churn from that product, they're starting to go use other ones like WhatsApp and Instagram. However, the LTV or the lifetime value of the user on WhatsApp and Instagram are much lower than Facebook. So that provides somewhat of a dilemma for Zuckerberg. He can either push individuals to go or push users to go use these other products, but they'll generate less revenue from them. Or he can try to keep them trapped in the moat of the existing Facebook product, which has a higher LTV, but ultimately is dying. And so I think they're really, really trying to dig deep for a new revenue stream, a new kind of Hail Mary pass. Instagram and WhatsApp were acquisitions. Those were not built internally at Facebook. And so they're desperately looking for what's going to be that next big revenue stream.
Well, certainly it looks like Libra could have the potential to be this revenue stream if it does go as planned and as stated in the white paper release so far. However, I do want to touch on one point that you made there, talking about it wouldn't influence Bitcoin's proposition as a gold 2.0, the store of value. But there have always been those who've said that store of value proposition for Bitcoin goes against the sort of initial vision and idea of Bitcoin as an actual functional currency of day-to-day use. Do you think this sort of Libra project and other big projects like it, whether we talk about Amazon coin, Apple Pay, or Samsung coin, or things that are being put out in those regards, do you think they limit the prospect of Bitcoin being functionally used as a day-to-day means of transfer?
I don't think so, because Bitcoin right now is not being used as a day-to-day transfer for coffee or sandwiches or pizza. due to its volatility and coordination problem, and also other fees and expenditures associated, like the transaction fee, plus the volatility fee, plus the exchange fee, which is required to transact with Bitcoin for day-to-day purchases. I don't, in as well, you have the coordination problem, which is the number of merchants that accept it are extremely low, because the number of Bitcoin users, even though Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency by network effect, by many, many magnitudes, it still doesn't have enough users to warrant, your local merchant focusing on adding it, because so many people are asking to pay in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a while to go before its volatility is low enough and before enough people have adopted it for it to really be useful as a classical like merchant processing sort of like payment method. There are other cryptocurrencies that have touted their lower fees or their faster processing, which aren't necessarily true, by the way. They still have volatility fees and exchange fees, and their faster processing just means that they simply have less of a thermodynamic guarantee, which we'll cover later in proof of work with our proof of work segment. But they're going to have a lot more, their narratives are predicated on the premise that they are cheaper for payments. And so I see those cryptocurrencies hurting a bit more than Bitcoin will based on this news.
Yes, so as I suppose you would say in terms of Bitcoin, perhaps not the whole altcoin community, but the Libra could be a rising tide that lifts all ships sort of situation.
It's good for awareness. It's good for legitimacy and adoption. It makes a large amount of money and stakeholders in the world a little bit more comfortable with dipping their toes into cryptocurrency. So I view it as a plus in that regard. I view it as a negative towards any cryptocurrency that had a narrative around cheap payments or faster payments.
Okay.
So like XRP would be, I would presume, very negatively impacted by this long term.
Certainly, so it'll be interesting to see come first half of 2020 when Libra predicts they will be able to actually release their product full-blown to the public. It will be interesting to see how, as you say, currencies like XRP fare in the wake of that, although the whole industry as a whole will be watching that one closely. All right, but now turning to another point that I suppose relates to this efficacy of the Bitcoin network and its application in the wider world. Now, we just had Bitcoin's hash rate hit all-time highs again. It's really, there's a lot of mining power out there being rededicated to the Bitcoin network, but as with the positivity and the security of the network that instills, on the flip side of that, arguably there are a bit of wasteful limitations, whether we talk about that in terms of computing usage, energy usage, and whatnot, that are seen to be somewhat wasteful. Now, Dan, I know you've got some views on this. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so the narrative that Bitcoin's proof of work consumes a lot of electricity and that's a bad thing, I think is really misguided. And we've seen, a lot of researchers hot take is that the researchers aren't necessarily intellectually honest. And I wouldn't necessarily call them researchers because their data is so flawed that I'm not really sure we could qualify that as research. For example, a lot of use Bitcoin's electricity usage per transaction, but that's completely false since a Bitcoin block constitutes both newly minted coins and Bitcoin transactions. So just trying to divide it by raw transactions would be silly. In addition, the opening and closing of a Lightning channel can happen with a Bitcoin transaction. So Bitcoin two on-chain transactions can represent tens of thousands of transactions on layer 2. But as well, what happens with these researchers is that I've seen this kind of core common theme start with Bitcoin uses too much electricity, and then that narrative gets debunked, and then they go, well, Bitcoin doesn't use renewable electricity, and then that narrative gets debunked, for example, by CoinShares research, where they estimated 74% of Bitcoin mining is done with renewable energy, and then finally they'll move the goalpost yet again and say, well, Bitcoin is displacing other energy usage, and it's like, well, so does every use of electricity in the world. The core premise here is that most of these researchers value Bitcoin's electricity usage at 0. They think Bitcoin is providing no utility for the world, which is completely ridiculous. And by the way, there's a market mechanism that we can use to determine if Bitcoin is doing something useful, and that's called paying for electricity. No one out here has the moral authority to tell you what to do with your electricity after you buy it. For example, there's not an electricity police that monitors if you're watching the Kardashians versus an educational nature program. And the fact that anyone would try to criticize your energy usage after you've already paid for it is completely absurd. We don't do that for any other industry, nor any other consumer item that you buy or service that you pay for. So the idea that we would criticize Bitcoin's energy usage, which is really, really, really core to building a new financial system, is frankly absurd.
So it's interesting as well. We interviewed a member of CoinShares recently about that report on energy use, and they stated an interesting point that Bitcoin miners often serve as energy purchasers of last resort, buying up that cheap energy, often from renewable projects, that is left over and would otherwise go out of use and not be used, particularly, again, in China, in Sichuan province, where so much Bitcoin mining is currently centralized. Do you think that that can end up proving Bitcoin as a net positive for energy use, being able to buy up some of that wasted energy and potentially inspire people to build more renewable projects?
Definitely. So Bitcoin miners have to purchase their equipment, which is called ASICs, and then they have to purchase electricity. And since ASICs can be put anywhere in the world, and technically they can be put in space as well, Bitcoin ASICs hunt for the cheapest electricity anywhere. So that electricity could be in the middle of Alaska, in the middle of Antarctica, or in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Bitcoin miners don't care where the electricity comes from. And miners, given the incentive to be profitable, will perpetually hunt for the cheapest, aka lowest value electricity, which means the electricity is valued so low that not many other people want to bid on that electricity. For example, the stranded electricity. So if you have electricity that's generated by a power plant, and the local area is not consuming all of that power cannot be piped then to the next city because the electricity will be lost in transmission. So Bitcoin miners can harness that excess or that near zero value electricity anywhere in the world. So I view it as a net positive because Bitcoin mining, as it becomes a larger and larger industry, as Bitcoin's market cap increases, will become a bigger hunt for that cheaper electricity and may actually spur innovation and adoption of new technologies to harness that electricity.
But what about talking about more efficient systems? Now, obviously, Bitcoin was the first out there. They, pioneered the industry and are still maintain their place of market primacy and dominance. But there are many out there who claim, and I'm certainly no technical expert, but many out there who claim to have more efficient either proof of work systems or proof of stake systems that manage to actually create a more efficient form of mining that would be more effective. Wouldn't it be better for us to switch to one of those coins rather than sticking by Bitcoin when it isn't potentially the most efficient out there?
Well, so that's a great and natural question that people should ask, which is, are we being as efficient as possible? But by definition, Bitcoin's proof of work is the most efficient consensus mechanism. And here's why. In the real world, we build vaults and locks and defensive mechanisms around things that we value, things that we care about. And no one would ever criticize your usage of energy and resources to do that. But in the digital world, how do we do something like that? And through Bitcoin's proof of work, we take energy in the real world. And through proof of work, we use that to validate and build digital walls around Bitcoin's ledger. And so Bitcoin's proof of work is a beautiful mechanism because there is no way to fake the proof of work. And so it's really rooted in physics, not code. And that's what makes it the most efficient, because there is no other way to perfectly take in electricity, turn it into hashes, and use those hashes to protect the network. Bitcoin essentially cannot become more efficient because it burns pure electricity in order to build that digital wall. And so saying, hey, can we make it more efficient, would be like, hey, I'd like to build a wall, but not actually build that wall. I'd like to build a wall that looks like a wall, but it's actually using half the electricity. And you're like, well, the wall's built of electricity, so using half of it would make it less strong. And so Bitcoin, by definition, is efficient and is the most efficient because it's the most efficient way to take energy in the real world and use that to build a wall of energy in the digital world.
Well, Dan, I don't think we could end on a more clear-cut note than that. The most efficient system out there. It's just a proof of concept right there for Bitcoin and for the clear fact that, as you say, you need to HODL with HEDL and continue with Dan Held, making sure that you stick with Bitcoin and see how it plans out in the future. All right, Dan, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on BlockTV. We'll see you next week. And of course, keep watching at blocktv.com. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter